If you live in the region of occupied Ukraine that Russia calls the Donetsk People's Republic, you're currently facing a lot of serious problems right now. Ukraine's increasingly effective mid-range drone strikes are causing chronic gasoline shortages and electricity blackouts. And there's a pretty good chance that the Wildberries order you just placed might not be delivered on time. But more and more people in Russia are facing the same problems, so maybe that's not so bad. There's a very serious shortage of doctors across all of occupied Ukraine, especially specialist doctors. This is a really big problem, but as long as you just don't get sick, you should be fine. But the residents of the DNR do face one particularly serious problem that, so far, is worse there than in any other territory controlled by Russia. They don't have nearly enough water. And I'm not talking about a short-term water shortage. One neighborhood in Donetsk, the DNR's capital, has not had running water at all since June. For the other million or so people living in the city, they get running water for just 4 hours a day, every 3 days. Let that sink in for a moment. When the water shuts off in your home on a Monday evening, it won't come on again until late Thursday afternoon. And that's when the system is working, which it is often not at the moment. If Ukrainian drones knock out the power grid, as is happening a lot lately, the pumping stations that are needed to deliver the water can be offline for days at a time. If you live on one of the top floors of Donetsk's many apartment blocks, the water pressure can be so low it won't reach your apartment at all. Ever. What's weird about the water crisis, though, is that, unlike the shortages of electricity, gasoline, and online deliveries, this isn't a recent problem, nor is it a problem caused by Ukraine's recent drone attacks. The DNR's water system has been failing the region's residents for years, and although the water crisis this summer is very serious, it's more or less a repeat of what happened this time last year. Things got so bad last summer that Vladimir Putin summoned the head of the DNR, Denis Pushilin, to come to the Kremlin and explain the situation in a televised meeting on August 4th, 2025. During the meeting, Pushilin promised Putin he was doing everything possible to solve the crisis. But a year later, there is no sign of any improvement. There are a lot of signs of complacency, though. The biggest problem with the DNR's water system is that the occupation forces have completely failed to maintain or repair it. For example, here's a video from June showing a steady flow of water from a burst pipe that has been flooding a street in Donetsk since March. And here's another video taken a few days later in Makiivka, just a few kilometers away. And here's another from Donetsk, taken in late July. During his meeting with Putin last year, Pushilin admitted the main cause of the water shortage was poor infrastructure, saying that up to 60% of the DNR's water supply is lost to leaky and broken pipes. Pushilin has been running the DNR since 2018, though, so that prompts a serious question. Is he just an incompetent administrator? Or is something else preventing the DNR from fixing its broken water system? There is a lot of evidence that points to the idea that Pushilin is incompetent, or at least the DNR authorities as a whole are. Later in this video, I will share what has to be one of the most gonzo, stupid, and suicidal ideas a local government has ever even thought of implementing. Even the official news service of the DNR had to admit that this plan was way too dangerous to proceed, and it has been quietly dropped. But one of the founding fathers of the DNR, Andrei Pergin, has proposed another, much more sinister explanation. Despite the lack of running water in people's homes, the DNR has plenty of bottled water in shelves in supermarkets, and has plenty of drinking water for sale at special kiosks around the region. Bottled water and the water at kiosks are supplied by local, private companies, and according to Pergin, Pushilin and his entourage control all 6 companies supplying this privately provided drinking water, allegedly making astronomical amounts of money. If this is true, And if Pushilin is slow-walking the repairs to the DNR water infrastructure to create demand for bottled water, that would arguably make the DNR leadership the most corrupt, the most cynical, and I would argue one of the most evil local governments active in the world today. But is it true? And what is the harebrained scheme I just mentioned that might have poisoned thousands of people across the DNR? Stay tuned, I'll explain. Hi everyone, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and in this video we're going to discuss a topic that has faded from most Western media headlines, but even with the increasingly effective drone strikes from Ukraine, remains one of the biggest challenges to everyday life for people living in the Donetsk People's Republic. So I want to start things off by showing you a recent online fundraising appeal by the Russian Orthodox Church. Like much of Europe, the DNR is experiencing a very hot summer, and the goal is to raise about $7,000 to buy bottled water for elderly people who live in the parts of Donetsk which have no running water. Explaining the crisis, it says, in extreme heat, drinking water supplies run out very quickly, and there's often simply nowhere to refill them. The water supply isn't working, and not everyone can get to a water outlet. It then explains that for many people, buying water isn't an option because there are no jobs in these areas, and many elderly people in Donetsk can't access old age pensions. The local government does sometimes send in water trucks, but the appeal explains that these deliveries are never certain, and then says dehydration and high temperatures take a severe toll on people. Chronic or age-related illnesses in the elderly become more acute. A sip of water becomes a lifesaver and a step toward life. So this is really grim. But the really crazy thing is that despite all these problems, the Russian government is actively encouraging people to move to this part of occupied Ukraine, and even provides heavily subsidized mortgages to help them buy apartments and houses that probably don't have access to regular running water. Most people watching this video will have access to running water in their homes 24/7 and may have never stopped to think just how important that is to their daily life. Hopefully the Orthodox Church will succeed in delivering drinking water to those elderly people in Donetsk. But what do they do for water for cooking? Or for doing the dishes? Or washing clothes? Or taking a shower? If you think about it, your life would get pretty miserable pretty quickly without a regular supply of safe, drinkable water. Now imagine how you'd feel if you had to put up with that, not just for a day or for a week, but for years. Of course, most homes in the DNR do have running water occasionally. In Donetsk, where the worst shortages are, you can expect to get water for a few hours every 3 days. In Mariupol, the situation isn't nearly so bad. The residents there get water every 2 days. But many places get no water at all. Here's an article about the Semashko neighborhood in Donetsk, which has gone without running water for 2 months. A resident named Lydia is quoted saying, "When I call Donbass Water, which is the local water utility, I always get different excuses. The pump is broken, the water level is low, the voltage is fluctuating, or they gave orders not to open the valve. I call back a minute later, and they'll tell me a different story." So if you're a resident of Semashko, or if you live on the top floor of an apartment building, or maybe it's been 2 days since the water was last running and your stocks have run out, here are your options. If you're lucky, there might be a local facility where you can go fill your water bottle for free. Here's a video from a few days ago of people filling bottles at a market in Mariupol. A lot of people. Just look at this line. Sometimes this is drinking water, but often the water you can collect for free is what's called technical water, which is water that is safe enough to bathe in or flush the toilet, but is not safe for cooking with or for drinking. For example, here's an urgent message for the people of Mariupol alerting them that on the 7th of August, they can collect free water in these 5 locations. But it's technical water. You can't drink it. Drinking water is widely available in most places though, if you're willing to pay for it, about 60 US cents a liter at your local First Republican supermarket. Or, for roughly the same money but hopefully closer to home, you can fill bottles at private water kiosks dotted around the region. Or for more money up front, you can arrange for a water delivery service to bring giant 5-gallon bottles to your home. But if you've got lots more money and time to wait, you could perhaps put a deposit down on a new luxury apartment currently under construction, so it is claimed, which, thanks to custom-made underground water storage tanks, will provide uninterrupted running water 24 hours a day. But obviously, this is well beyond the means of the average DNR resident. And besides, why are things so bad that rich people have to build underground storage tanks just to be able to flush the toilet? The area of southeastern Ukraine known as the Donbass is naturally very dry, especially in the summer. Heavy industry and coal mining flourished in the region starting in the late 1800s, but this ended up contaminating much of the local groundwater. The Soviets built a canal in the 1950s to supply the region with water from the Seversky Donetsk River, and this mostly worked for 70 years, until Russia launched the full-scale invasion in 2022, when the water in the canal stopped flowing. According to the Ukrainians, this was because the canal was badly damaged by Russian attacks on Slovyansk, near where the canal originates. But DNR leader Denis Pushilin claims that instead, Ukraine implemented a water blockade and is denying water to the people of the DNR as a hostile act. What has to be one of the most pathetic-sounding attempts at propaganda spin I've ever heard. But it's not really the dry climate, contaminated groundwater, or battle-damaged canal that is preventing the DNR from providing these basic services to its people. Even according to Russian reporting, the biggest problem is the DNR's dilapidated water supply network, which loses between 60 and 70% of the water in the system. According to what Pushilin told Putin last year, this is the fault of the Ukrainian authorities who, before the pro-Russian rebels seized the local administration, failed to properly maintain the system. But that was 12 years ago. So, come to think of it, this is actually the most pathetic propaganda spin I've ever heard. The Russian occupation forces tried to solve the problem by building a new water pipeline in 2023, which, in theory, pumps 270,000 cubic meters of water per day from the Don River into the Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. But the network is so leaky, this doesn't come close to solving the problem. Even increased rainfall this year hasn't helped. Reservoirs have been filling up, but the Donbass water utility is conserving this extra water to prepare for the winter. Like most parts of Russia, homes in the DNR are heated using vast centralized systems that pump hot water into radiators at a city-wide level. If there isn't enough water to fill the radiators, people freeze. And here's something gross. One reason the radiators need more water is because desperate residents often drain the water from the radiators in their homes. I'm assuming they're not drinking it, but have you ever seen water that comes out of a radiator? It looks really disgusting. The water shortage was just as bad last summer, and residents complained so much that Putin intervened and forced Pushilin to come and grovel before him at the Kremlin and make a lot of excuses. And maybe because of this pressure, the DNR authorities began to seriously consider an incredibly stupid plan that could have put the health of the entire region at risk. Because of its long history as a coal mining region, there are an estimated 85 abandoned mines in the DNR, and as they're not properly cared for, many of them have flooded. So there is a lot of water sitting in these mines. But water that sits in coal mines gets contaminated by heavy metals, toxic substances like arsenic, and even radioactive chemicals. But still, there's a lot of water sitting in these mines. So in October 2025, these geniuses started floating the idea of pumping that water out of the mines and into the DNR's water network. Oh, sure, the authorities wanted to purify the water first, so, that's okay. But even if the DNR had a state-of-the-art triple purification system operating in optimal conditions, something it surely doesn't have, that wouldn't remove all of the contaminants. Let's say it removed 99%. Would you drink mine water, which is 99% purified? Would you take a bath in it? Would you want it in your home? Despite the insanity of this plan, water samples were sent from 29 mines for testing, and discussions continued for 6 months until someone realized that this would create an even bigger problem. Even if you could remove 100% of the toxins from mine water, those toxins don't disappear. The process would produce huge quantities of highly concentrated toxic brine, which is super dangerous. After you finish processing that, you'd then have to store it or dispose of it. And ever since this article ran in April, the idea of everyone living off mine water has been quietly dropped. So what about this allegation that Denis Pushilin is secretly profiting off of all the privately sold water in the DNR? This was a claim made last summer by a man named Andrei Pergin, one of the men who founded the DNR in 2014, and who was once the chairman of its parliament. But Pergin was deposed as chairman in 2015, expelled from parliament altogether in 2017, and Pushilin replaced him as chairman and then took control over the entire DNR in 2018. These two definitely have some history, and I suspect a lot of personal animosity. So in the summer of 2025, a moment when the DNR's water shortage was getting a lot of attention, Pergin sat down on a park bench in Donetsk and made a startling accusation. According to Pergin, there are 11 wells in the DNR with drinkable water, but only 2 are in current use, and these supply 6 water bottling factories, which are all controlled by Pushilin and his entourage, who make enormous amounts of money. In other words, the current water shortage is to Pushilin's financial advantage, and he has absolutely no incentive to solve the problem. There are some serious reasons to doubt Pergin's claims. First of all, he's not a credible person, and also he has a clear motive to discredit Pushilin. And also, Pushilin has introduced price controls on bottled water to keep it from getting too expensive, which is not an obvious move for a profiteer. At the same time, these private companies supplying water to the DNR must be some of the most important and probably some of the most profitable companies in the region. I find it hard to believe that Pushilin doesn't have some financial exposure to these companies, even if it's only in the forms of bribes and backhanders. That's just how the Russian system, which has been imposed on occupied Ukraine, normally works. Pergin made another startling claim in his interview, saying that only about 30% of the people currently living in the DNR were natives, by which he meant people who had been living in that region before it gained de facto independence in 2014. The vast majority of the population, he said, had moved to the DNR from Russia, presumably attracted by the vast amount of incentives and subsidies offered by the Kremlin. I don't know if Pergin is right about this, but dang, I mean, if you move to an occupied region that lacks running water, how stupid are you? If you've watched this far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give the video a like and hype it. That helps. And also, I have a free monthly newsletter in which I discuss the topics I cover in my videos at greater length and provide updates. So if you're interested in that, it's free. Just go to fredorockwell.substack.com. Lastly, 2 people somehow found my Patreon account, which I set up ages ago just to kind of make sure I had one. And they've started contributing on a monthly basis, which I didn't ask them to do. I've never mentioned Patreon in this channel, but maybe it's time. So I'll put a link in the description. I'm not sure where this is going yet, but if there's enough interest, I'll try and produce some Patreon exclusive content, perhaps. We'll see. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.